Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to talk about one of the largest Doomsday bunker communities in the world. So let's get to it. Alright, so I originally wanted to do a reaction video to a video made by Vice talking about the apocalypse plan of the 1%. But I figured that would be kind of hokey and somewhat out of line with what you've come to expect on this channel. I will leave that to the unoriginal avant-garde of the trending feed. But I thought I would talk about the actual community of Doomsday bunkers that they show in this video. It's pretty amazing. And unlike the video that was done by Vice, I'm not going to put the cartoony music in the background and make fun of people who are going and buying bunkers in this location. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of doing this sort of thing. Alright, so I want to first off say that I'm in no way, shape, or form connected with the Vivos company. I think we may have had some brief dialogue on YouTube before. I would at some point like to go out and check out their emergency shelters. So this is not going to be a hit piece, and it's also not going to be some glaring review of something I know very little about, aside what I can find on the internet. Now, basically what I know about this Vivos X-Point shelter, you can go on Google Earth, just south of Edgewood in South Dakota, so not quite geographically centered, but far enough inland that if there ever was any major tsunamis or something like that, it's going to be well out of the way. It's at a very high altitude, very low population density. They boast that it's over 100 miles away from any major nuclear targets. However, I would presume that this may still be on the USSR hit list if, yes, I know the USSR doesn't exist anymore, but you know what I mean, because this was a former ordnance storage for the military. So all of these little shelters that you see here are built to withstand something like a 500,000 pound blast. I don't really know what that equates to. And obviously a direct hit from a nuke, all this is bye-bye. It's still built pretty tough. It could definitely sustain some damage. With the Vivos company, what I've noticed is that they pay a lot of attention to detail. I mean, just the simple fact that they've probably found one of the most strategically sound places in the US to build these apocalyptic shelters. You know, you can't say that they're not trying to cover all their bases in terms of strategic location. Now, to play the devil's advocate on their website, you could argue that they are really trying to sell this. Maybe they're trying to oversell it in a way with regards to threats of a pending apocalyptic doom. But all eschatology and fundamentalism and doomsday prophecy, revelations, mark of the beast, all that stuff aside, you guys know that there's a myriad of ways that the collapse could come. And one thing that I'm probably in agreement with the Vivos company is that indeed civilization now more than ever is held together by very finely woven threads. And it doesn't take much for that to become an entangled mess. And there's a multitude of ways that could happen. That said, they are just a little bit shameless in how they're selling it. But like I said, I'm not here to attack the Vivos company, because indeed I do want to go and do a tour in one of their shelters. Now, you'll notice that the video that was done by Vice, which was entitled The Apocalypse Escape Plan for the 1%, I don't know if you really need to be a part of the 1%, first of all, to get one of these bunkers, because they're only, I think they're $7,000 to $35,000. So, you know, a person of modest means, middle class, if they had some savings, you could buy yourself one of these bunkers. So to say it's the apocalypse plan of the 1%, I think the actual 1% or the 0.1% have a lot more than this. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of putting it on your property or off. Now, what I was saying is that the video that they did clearly was intended to make fun of this idea and to make fun of the people who were there. If you can't see that in watching the video, then something's wrong. Clearly, they put the funny music on in the background. There's a point in the video where I even had to laugh, where one of the snowbirds who had purchased one of these bunkers was talking about how it's a great place to just go for a vacation. And then they go into this empty cement bunker, which is just, you know, has a few food supplies in it. And that's kind of the punchline that, you know, these people are crazy type thing. Now, is it crazy to have one of these bunkers? It depends on, I guess, your motives. It's really strategically the best place you would ever want to probably have one of these bunkers if it is off the USSR shit list, if you know what I'm saying. So from a militaristic standpoint, which is why these were built in the first place, it's probably the perfect place. If you were ever going to want to bug out for the end of the world as we know it, this is the place to do that. You can't really argue that. Some people are going to argue that, okay, so you're going to be sharing this property with 575 other off-grid bunkers. Now, there's a significant amount of space between each one of the bunkers, and I believe that the military did that for strategic purposes once again, just so that they were far enough apart that you would need a very large ordnance to destroy everything at once. Each one of these bunkers is 2,200 square feet, and I think there's 12-foot ceilings at the peak of the dome. So basically it's a dome. I'll show you an image here of how it looks. It's a dome, and then over top is a few feet of concrete and some soil. Like I say, built to withstand a peripheral hit, I suppose you could say. Not a direct hit, obviously, but maybe if you're on the periphery, you'd still survive it. Now, at this site, they're accessing an aquifer, which is 1,000 feet deep. So I wouldn't be too confident in the water supply in this region. Remember, this was built for storing ordnance. It wasn't built for storing human beings, per se. They have other places for that, which are much more fancier than this. So these were in use from 1942 to 1967, when nuclear arms weren't that common yet. I mean, they were obviously starting to in the 60s and in the 50s. That's when nuclear testing was ramping up. But this seen its heyday when we weren't really in the nuclear age yet. So they're not really built to withstand, you know, direct hits from a nuclear attack. So in some ways they're militarily obsolete. So for the sake of trying to reason through this, I'm probably going to contradict myself and say that, you know, maybe it's not the best place for people because of the really deep aquifer that they're trying to access for water. The fact that it's not really built to withstand modern nuclear armaments, even though it probably isn't a target. But if the Axis is lobbing thousands of nukes over our way, I don't see why they wouldn't just throw one in this direction, just in case they felt it was actually a cover for a very large arms storage. So the entire property is 22 square miles, 3/4 the size of Manhattan, as shown here. Very far from any major seismic activity, as they indicate. They claim that there's abundant resources, rolling hills. It's not a forested region. Would be a good region for, you know, cattle grazing and maybe growing some staple crops. Now let's talk about some of the other considerations here. So is this a good idea? Would I personally buy myself one of these? Now, if I had a lot of money and I lived within driving distance of this region, it's probably something I would consider. There's two main knee-jerk criticisms to this idea. Number one is that how are you going to get there when the crap is going to hit the fan? If you're living in New York City, how are you possibly going to get there? Well, you know, money talks, right? So if you need to get to a place and time is tight, if you have enough money, and as oblivious as people are nowadays to their own existential threats, somebody is going to fly you out there in their private plane, and I'm sure you could convince them if you took them with you or something to that effect. But generally speaking, yes, how are you going to get there is a logistical problem. The other thing people are going to say is that, well, you wouldn't want to be surrounded by a bunch of other people, like 575 other bunkers, because they may just take your stuff. And that is true. There might be some militantly minded folks amongst that 575 who at some point, you know, are going to get the wise idea that, hey, there's a lot of old rich people here that we could just jack for all their stuff. And then I guess the other argument would be that while the company itself would, you know, would plan some sort of way to take all your stuff. Now, I'm not saying they would do that. I'm just saying that would have to be a rational consideration for anybody trying to consider this, is that if the shit hit the fan, what's to stop the company from just closing the gates on you when it all came down to the wire? Now, again, I got to emphasize, I'm not saying they would do that. In fact, the guy who owns the place seems to really believe in what he's doing. He really, he seems to be out there to make sure that people would be safe in that sort of situation. I'm sure he's making a good chunk of change off it, but at the same time, there's other businesses for entrepreneurs like that to go into. So you have to have some sort of personal interest or belief that this is actually going to happen to commit yourself to this level of thinking. Kind of like Ron from Atlas Survival Shelters. You have to be a prepper to want to build Doomsday bunkers. I mean, there's no way around it. You don't just get into that industry by trying to make money off of people. Some people who've never had their own business will probably never understand that and always think the worst of people's motives, but it's true. But that is something you need to consider. So I would definitely want to shake hands with the owner of this facility. I would want to know everything about the perimeter security, because with regards to the community thing, you're going to find yourself in a community inevitably, unless you're bugging out Davy Crockett style into the wilderness. You are going to find yourself around a bunch of people. So probably better to be around a bunch of people who had made provisions for this very thing for a long period of time and all have fully stocked bunkers. At least for the first couple years, people are going to be kept satiated, and they're probably not going to be at each other's throats. So is it a good idea to drop $35,000 on one of these things if you have extra money? I would say look at what people spend their money on right now. I mean, do you really need a $100,000 car to drive down the street? I mean, for some people, $35,000 is chump change. For other people, it's a lot of money. But if 35 grand is chump change for you, you find yourself in this neck of the woods, you have a surefire way to get there, then maybe there's some reason for wanting to go to a place like this. All I would say, though, is to make sure that you have a good Faraday cage in there, because you're probably going to be very close to the epicenter of an EMP blast if that was a tactic which was employed, if that was one of the SHTF situations to worry about. Pretty much for any major disaster, barring a direct nuclear hit, which I don't think this would be on the hit list, but I could be wrong about that. If this was on the hit list, then I would definitely say no. This is not a good idea. Now, there's people who will say, no, if you're rich enough, you should build one of these in your backyard instead. But consider that if you are rich enough and you build one of these in your backyard and you're surrounded by a bunch of other non-preppers, wouldn't you rather be surrounded by preppers than non-preppers? I'm not saying that preppers as people are any better or more trustworthy than non-preppers, but I would rather be around people who had a bunch of supplies and weren't eyeballing my supplies, if you know what I mean. So there's something to be said about having a community of bunkers, and the idea itself should not be just shot down with cartoon music and poking fun at people for wanting to do this. Now the real question is, would there ever be a grid down scenario for which this sort of community of bunkers would actually be ideal? And I would say, yeah, absolutely. Electromagnetic pulse, this would probably be a better place to be than most places. Nationwide, 80% kill rate pandemic, possibly. This would be, you'd be isolated. Obviously, in that case, you'd probably want to be as isolated as possible. But when that virus comes back around again in the future, it's probably going to get you anyways. But at least to give yourself some distance from other people for the longest period of time. World War III, yes, barring a direct hit, this would be the place to be. Now, it is a little closer to the super volcano than most would like, but I think the likelihood of that occurring is very slim in our lifetimes, although it's slated to blow at some point here in the near future. So as off base as this might seem, it really isn't that bad of an idea if you look at it from a perspective of a person who has a lot of disposable income. If I had a lot of disposable income, I'd probably be putting a bunker into my shelter first at my home base before I put it in the middle of the country, which was possibly inaccessible to me. But hey, people do what they want with their money. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this YouTube channel is to support yourself by gearing up through CanadianPreparedness.com or BugoutRoll.ca. Premium quality gear at the best possible price using the incredibly secure and easy to use Shopify platform. We offer free shipping to the United States for orders over $200 USD and free shipping to Canada over $75. So support the channel by supporting yourself.